Welcome back to Fix It to Grow It, the business podcast about optimizing your processes and the value of your people. My name is Dave Kislik, and I am finally back after a small hiatus from podcast production. As you can see behind me, the scenery has changed. Since our last episode in early March, I've been working with new clients, tackling the wonders of home ownership, and trying to introduce my cat, who thinks she owns the place, to a dog that doesn't know the meaning of personal space. At the same time, we've been able to celebrate some big wins with clients who are progressing through major implementations, coaching packages, and untangling interpersonal and systematic knots. I have a bunch of interviews ready to go, some from earlier in the year and some more recent, so let's get back in gear. To kick things off again, I have the great pleasure to introduce the founder and president of Liz Kislik Associates herself, Liz Kislik. Besides being my mother and mentor, Liz is a management consultant and executive coach and a frequent contributor to Harvard Business Review and Forbes. And her TEDx, Why There's So Much Conflict at Work and What You Can Do to Fix It, has received more than 500,000 views. For over 30 years, she has specialized in developing high-performing leaders and workforces and has helped family-run businesses, national nonprofits, and Fortune 500 companies like American Express, Girl Scouts, Staples, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, and Highlights for Children solve their thorniest problems. If that isn't enough, she's also the creator of Better at Work with Liz Kislik, an animated miniseries about resolving workplace challenges, which I got to help produce and even play some of the music on. We're a little bit proud of it if you couldn't tell. This episode is going to be a little different than previously. We're skipping the Fix It 15 in the interest of taking a deeper look into the topic of why most of us have a tough time taking the long view, being able to see the big picture, and how understanding ourselves allows us to understand the full scope of what's happening around us. And of course, how we can use those skills to move our teams and projects and companies and selves forward. I'm hoping this is the first of many conversations with Liz on all kinds of subjects. So please send us a comment, or if you have other topics you'd want to hear us discuss. And with that, let's get started. Welcome, Liz, to Fix It to Grow It. Obviously, so good to have you. It's so usual to have you. I mean, we talk like this pretty much every day, every week, but never recording with video. So, hey, new experience. Obviously, I mentioned who you are and a bit of our connection in the intro, but please give us a little bit, the highlights of your background for the audience.
Okay. I guess I won't discuss the day of your birth. So in addition to being a parent of two wonderful children, I will say, not just one, in addition to that, I think of myself as a management consultant and executive coach. And I come out of what you might think of as a marketing and operations background originally. That's what I did for the first few years after I graduated from college. And then I went out on my own consulting in those areas. And through a long time, 30 years plus of doing this kind of work, it's actually evolved from specifically operations work, and I'm glad you're around to do that now, into more consistent executive coaching specifically, particularly with an eye toward strategy, critical thinking, organizational structure, and how to make sure that people are working well together to get the work of the organization done.
I'm glad you said strategy and critical thinking, because I want to zero in on those two aspects in a big way. And for the audience, a little bit of background here. This is a topic that Liz and I have talked about at some length because it is so applicable to every client, every business, every person in some way or another. And my big picture question is, and I'm going to put this in a bad way. I'm prefacing that immediately. I'm absolutely putting this in a bad way. Why don't people think further ahead? And what I mean, because that's obviously too open-ended. What I mean is, when you're thinking of a plan, there are steps to that plan. There are logical conclusions at the end of that plan. Why does it feel like most plans and most people's processes and thought patterns and all of that end up not planning out the last couple of steps or even the conclusion? We go 3 steps and say, okay, we've planned enough. And then we get to step 4 and everybody throws their hands up.
Yes. Or, they take some left turn somewhere, which actually is more likely. What that made me think of, I haven't thought of this in years. I'm trying to remember which group it was with that we vetted something like 30 different possibilities. We could do this, we could do that, we could do the other, really critiquing them. By the time we got to the 32nd or 33rd, people were too exhausted and they just said, let's do that. Which, let me loop back. What did we come from as humans? We were not concerned about what was happening 6 months down the road. Was that rustling in the grass a snake or a tiger? So the immediacy, are we safe? Can we keep ourselves and our kids fed? Can we keep the tribe together, whoever the tribe happens to be? Those are the things that people still focus on. We evolved to do that. We did not evolve to figure out whether or not AI is hallucinating. That happens, okay? And some of us deal with it better than others. But just the amount of, I don't know, regular over the transom email scams that people fall prey to because they're not thinking big picture. We think about what's in front of us. And if that looks reasonably good, we don't see any obvious red flags. Our brain wants to be satisfied by coming to that conclusion and being done. And the other thing is, those of us who really think ahead, we're often considered to be anxious or worriers, Cassandras. Why are you being so negative? When what we are actually doing is trying to game out, and you called it, I think, the logical conclusions, but I'm going to call it the likely outcomes. Because there are multiple potential outcomes. It is really hard for people to think each of them through and then do the thing that would be most valuable, which is to sift through those likely outcomes and think about, how do I improve and strengthen the strongest and get rid of the others?
So I want to then ask, how do we get people to think in that way? All of what you said makes sense as far as how people approach it and why this happens. But to use a real world example, chess players can do this. They look at so many steps ahead, and there's a logical decision of, I'm going to use this strategy. This is the smartest play for me. Why are chess players able to do that? Is there some relation to the gamifying of it that triggers something else in the brain? Or how can we get someone to that point of being able to?
What strikes me is something you love to talk about, which is pattern recognition. So I don't know how many possible moves there are and how many combinations there are, but one of the things that chess players do is they memorize.
Mm-hmm.
They memorize the patterns. They recognize, they have fancy names. It has a ritualistic aspect to it. There are multiple bounded activities that occur during a chess game, whether it's the clicking of the clock. There are forms that happen over and over. And the more structures you have, the better you can scaffold the behavior you need to do inside that. So one of the things about chess is both sides know the same rules. Your average Monday morning ops meeting, your executive leadership team meeting that happens every other Thursday, it's not like that. First of all, it's not clear that everybody has agreed to and will abide by the actual same rules. That's we could talk about that forever. But also, what you have to do in a workday is not a focused pursuit in the same way. You're interrupted by countless things. Most executives have to deal both with human problems and with system or infrastructure or operational or financial problems. These are different kinds of thinking. They have different kinds of patterns. So in answer to your question about what can you do, the first thing I would say is actually remember and learn from your history and the history of others. I don't mean say we tried that once 40 years ago, we're never trying it again, which certainly comes up. But a kind of rigorous review, the military is good at this, of what went poorly, what could we have prepared for better? And you can use that both after the event, which is the typical postmortem. I really like the practice called a premortem, where you have all the history, the knowledge, or the data present, and you say, what could go wrong? If something's going to go wrong here, what's it likely to be? What are the kinds of things that we know fail?
I'm laughing a little bit because that's a specific part of the project management guide. For those familiar who are PMPs, or I forget all the other acronyms out there, but if you've studied that guide, you know that there is a taking in of historical documents in order to influence future decisions. So why does it still feel like either people don't do this, whether they see the value in it or not, or is there some connection that's not being made between I have to look at this from a bigger picture? Because this is, by the way, something else for our audience that is an interesting balance between Liz and myself. She is an immensely incredible big picture thinker. I am very process oriented. I love being able to think big picture, but I'm definitely more process, figure it out, and see all the steps clearly. Liz can take that step back like nobody else. So why can't other people take that step back and reintroduce that important step into their process?
Okay. So I just wrote an email to somebody this morning, a client who had written to me about a problem, and all he could see were bad paths. And he's dealing with an upset team member, and he wrote, I know I shouldn't do A and I probably shouldn't do B. And I wrote back, definitely not A and definitely not B now. And I gave him some suggestions, and he thanked me for being level-headed. And I wrote back and said it was actually being open-eyed. So snake or tiger or whatever, one of the things is to get used to not only going back and drilling down, but widening out, really scanning. Now, you can do that as part of a simple exercise. What will this mean tomorrow, in a month, in a year, in 10 years? Any interval that's useful. You can also look at how will this affect all the stakeholders, not just what I'm working on and not even just the people I'm working with, but the extended concentric circles of stakeholders. Those are two very clear exercises that any manager, leader, executive should be doing for sure, and don't do often enough. So that's the sort of neat and tidy first step. The second thing I'll say to you, though, is not only does it take practice, but there's a kind of mental processing. I'm speculating about this. I haven't actually analyzed this before. I went through a period of studying a bunch of Buddhist psychology and got very comfortable with some of those tenets about the way the mind works. And the one I'll give you right now is that things arise and fall away. And whatever we think is happening, it's going to change. Something else is going to happen. So watching the processes of the mind, I'm really upset about this thing, this situation. It's a real situation, might even be really worth being upset. Being driven by the upsetness, even being driven by the fervor or need to fix it. As soon as you're driven, you lose some of the sense of the horizon line, the periphery. It's as if your mind is reacting to being under threat. When we're in danger, we lose field of vision. We have fewer sense perceptions because we've got to focus on either running or fighting. And getting yourself off that hook is absolutely the first thing you can do.
So I have two questions, and I'm going to ask for this one to be a short answer.
Good luck.
Because this is a little bit of a tangent.
Okay.
Are you saying that if we were more resilient individuals who could adapt more easily, more quickly, more readily to, fill in the blank, that we would then be able to think further down the line? We would be
Not
able
necessarily.
to? No. Okay.
Not necessarily. Because being more resilient might mean you could deal better with the tiger or the snake. Oh, look, I have a stick. Good, I can do something. It doesn't mean you can figure out what to tell your banker who is not going to like your current results.
Okay.
They're different kinds of problems. So the resilience is valuable. Being MacGyver-ish, if you remember that TV show, that's really valuable. Now, part of what he was doing was using whatever was lying around to create objects and processes that didn't exist before so he could escape or whatever that week's program was. This is creating mental patterns so you can think differently, think more deeply, and think with more detachment and discrimination. Not just how do I feel about this, but what do I actually think is likely to happen under the current conditions? Like, be more like a poker player. Is that actually a good analogy?
I think it could apply. I am not a very skilled poker player myself,
None.
but I understand that there's the idea of playing the player versus playing the odds. But it comes back to knowing the situation, having that ability to react and adapt, and pattern recognition to know what is likely to happen.
Yeah. Wait, let me just add one thing to that. It's paying attention, really paying attention. I'm going to give you an example from the current day.
Okay.
Whenever a new president comes into the White House, there are some people who voted for that person who end up disappointed and upset. And that's because they liked some of what that candidate said, really liked it. But they did not necessarily consider all of the candidates' other proposals, history, promises, etc. They hooked into the ones that were most meaningful to them or where they had a particular stake.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're surprised when that person goes and does the thing they said they would do, but it wasn't about your issue.
Right. So this is actually a good segue because that's an aspect of putting blinders on. And you mentioned in the previous segment about widening your view, about narrowing your view. This is a real pain point in my own personal experience, where at a previous job, there was a particular manager that told me and us that you're here right now. You have to go out here by 30%. You have to every day, 30% more, just expand your periphery. And logically, I know that his intention is for us to do what you're talking about, to be able to see more and therefore be able to react better in the moment when things are changing, but also to plan ahead to prevent certain things from happening or to be prepared when they do. What I never got was the how. And this is a complaint that I've had in various situations where the how is left off. We're only given the what. And that's on many different topics, but focusing here on big picture perspective versus being laser focused, because I want to give our audience some actionable takeaways. What are a couple of methods for you to train that widening of the perspective, to actually put that into practice?
Good. So I'm going to put you on the spot. I get to do this. It's all through mental processing. Okay. So I've already named some questions that you can be asking yourself to test your assumptions and to test your view, both your point of view. I'm here looking out. This is what I see. And also what happens if you scan. Do you remember what any of the things were? Okay, let me take you off the hook right now while you're still
Wait. Did you just plant one in there just to be? All right. So the questions you can ask yourself in order to widen. I'm coming back to the tiger and the snake.
Good.
About, do I recognize this thing? Do I know what this is? The pattern recognition aspect.
Yep.
And therefore I can immediately say, oh, that's not a problem, or that is a problem.
Right.
Or it is a problem, but I have the answer already.
Do you have a history of dealing with it? And what were the different conditions under different times? Okay, that's the going back to the data. Then there's the forward time horizon. What will this mean down the road? And that holds out the promise of your question at the top. People don't think far enough ahead. If you actually look at subsequent time horizons, what will any action now mean then? Not just what will it mean by Friday when we need to have a resolution, but what will it mean after that resolution has taken hold? So that time horizon is really important, particularly combined with the stakeholder horizon. Who will this affect and how? What will their reactions be? Will I need to deal with those? I better plan ahead. Okay, so those are just a few of, I don't know, the vectors. We'll have to come up with what we call this.
Well, before you move on, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there is a point in there that I want you to expand on. Because
Sure.
all of the rapid fire questions that you just mentioned make sense because they're all part of the step-by-step processing through the situation. But you said before that lightning round of ideas, you said about knowing how this decision or reaction or answer will appear at the end of the thing. Are you talking about how we will look back on this decision and evaluate it in hindsight? Or are you talking more about how it will change the outcome when we get that far down the road?
Could be either. They're both good.
Okay.
That thing about standing there at the end and looking back, is this what I wished I had done? Would I have wished for something different? That's like a pre-mortem. Okay. That's like, how's this going to play out? We know something's going to go wrong. What's it going to be? So that's excellent. What you're really doing is taking different perspectives on the same issue. That broadens your field of vision. I want to go back to the idea of not reacting when you feel emotional or under threat. When you're sitting in an office, we don't necessarily think about being under threat.
Mm-hmm.
Although if an executive is telling you, do this thing without telling you how, some part of your brain feels under threat. I could fail. I could screw up. I don't know what he means. All of that kind of stuff. So stress hormones start flowing. We all have these tells. Does your throat get tight? Do you start jiggling your foot? We all have these physical responses. When those are happening, we're not thinking as well. So to do any of this kind of work well and thoroughly, calming in any way is really important. And some people might do that by going for a run, getting the energy out, and thinking on the way. Great place for thinking, in the shower. Great place for thinking, driving the car, because you are occupied with other things that are familiar, therefore safe. And your brain has time and space to work on this more complicated, tricky stuff. Even thinking through step by step, you could start getting agitated again. Oh no, this group of employees is really going to hate that, and they're all going to complain, and the best one might quit, and what am I going to do? As soon as you get to that kind of, what am I going to do? You need to calm down again. Even in the process, you take a break, and then you think some more. And that is another big point about how you take in more. You don't expect you're going to see everything on the first pass. This is a reiterative process.
So I'm seeing a new direction we could go in, because everything that you just mentioned is really under the category of self-mastery. Understanding yourself enough to recognize the situation, do something about it to get your headspace correct, or at least improved,
Yes.
and then solve whatever the thing is. You also mentioned that leaders are not great at giving us the background or the, call it the fat around the meat of the situation.
Context. Just call it context.
So how would you advise a leader to more commonly give that context so that the team has more vision, more understanding, and therefore doesn't have to freak out as much? Or even if they're going to freak out anyway, they're still going to make better decisions.
Yes. The first thing is to do it yourself. Okay, to know where you are in the situation, how bad you think it is. Are you asking people to come and help you brainstorm on an issue, or are you saying all hands on deck, we have a big problem coming down the pipe? So for the leader, one of the most important things is to recognize that the people on your team do not have your point of view. In many ways, they're likely to be as concerned about you and how you feel about them as they are concerned about the problem itself. So there's this like double layer of the problem and working with your team, particularly if you have not done this work in advance, working with your team to work on the problem. Because as the leader, it's your responsibility to help them feel safe and not under threat. But safety and sense of threat are different for everybody. So you actually have to really know your people. You have to know your people, or you have to get to know your people. That's like a phase 0. I probably have 3 phase zeros. A second is you have to have thought about the problem at least enough to be able to explain the breadth of the problem. Or to say, we're going to have to, deal with competitor X. We've got to come up with a better version of our current product offering. This is just an example. That doesn't mean we're solving the product offering today and getting ready to go to market. There are a lot of steps before that happens. What do we know about competitor X and their product? And what's different about their customers versus ours? And does their product get used with other people's products in combination, or is it a standalone? And I could spew questions like this, for hours. But if you just say, we must fight competitor X, every person on your team's going to go about it a different way with incomplete data. I mean, data is always incomplete, but you at least want everybody to have the benefit, the advantage of what data you do have, the understanding you do have. And to say, here are the things we don't know. Don't send them into battle with just what you know. Make sure they know what you don't know.
So what about when your people are not necessarily interested in that context? I think you've very clearly explained some ways as a leader to give that context. What about in those situations where maybe they just don't care, or they're so focused on their own process that giving them the context, they might react, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Cool. Good to know that. But not internalize it, not use that to then think ahead. Now I'm coming back to the original topic here, to not think ahead and say, oh, because I know this is our goal, doing this thing now doesn't achieve that goal, even though it's the process I have laid out in front of me. So I should raise my hand. I should say something or alter it. They don't make that change. They don't make that connection. What do you do with those people, and why? I mean, it's such a broad question, but I really want to know why that happens. Why someone who's being given new information that's really valuable and helpful doesn't actually act on that.
Okay. I'm going to get lost because this has so many parts. So bring me
I know.
back.
I apologize
anytime.
for the complexity of it.
No. It's great stuff. So first of all, everybody is interested in the information they believe is useful to them. The thing is, you can't necessarily see their screen, their filter. If the only thing I'm interested in is keeping my job because my landlord just raised my rent, and I'm really frightened about some external thing, I will do the equivalent of, yes, boss, but I'm not really paying attention because my head's under threat.
Mm-hmm.
I am focused on, how do I let you know, the power source, that I'm on your team? And if I can get through that today, that's as much as I can do. And if it means tomorrow I'm actually going in the wrong direction, I don't even know it. So that's the very individual human basis. The second thing is the employment basis. If we hire the right people and they are interested and open-minded and aware and thoughtful, and then at some point they cease to be and they stop participating, they get stuck somewhere, they get resistant, it means we broke them. Not intentionally, but it means something in the structure of the work, the hierarchical relationships, the tools, something is not working for them and they have shut down. Then we have to get them to open up again. Hard. I mean, there are loads of things to do. I don't know that I'm going to address that today in a sufficient manner. But whether they are shut down or inexperienced or just not you, part of the leader's job is not to do what we're doing here, which is, I'm sort of spewing all this stuff at you, and people will pick out the couple of things that make sense to them. That's what happens all the time, by the way. People pick out the couple of things that have the most salience for them. And the rest, maybe they'll come back to, most likely not. And if they get some benefit, good. And if it seems to work, good. But all of your context giving, if it's too much at once or not tailored to the way they think, they'll miss most of it. So figuring out, I'm not talking about need to know, which is I'll tell you when you need it. That's actually a withholding strategy that preserves a power dynamic that does not encourage people to think for themselves. But creating the environment in which you structure the context so that you can define which buckets are which kind of data and who should be looking in which places, or how this data might affect you. For example, the customer satisfaction data might be one thing and the product safety data might be another thing. Does the same employee look at both? Maybe, maybe not. Do you need people who understand both working together? Yes. So part of the context is about why those things have to be looked at in concert. This is why leadership is exhausting. I mean, there are other reasons too, but if you're really thinking ahead, it's exactly to your question before. It's by not thinking ahead and planning how you are going to cover this information that the leader can leave the meeting thinking, okay, they took a lot of notes, they asked a few questions, they must have it. They might be right, they might be wrong.
I am going to tangent again because of one part that you said about they are not you. And I think that is such an important nugget that I'm calling it out again. It's something that I have talked about in the context of intention versus perception in communicating, and that nobody else is in your head, so nobody understands what you understand, how you understand, and the connections between. So being able to explain it not in a way that makes sense to you, but in a way that makes sense to them is crucial.
Yeah.
And I think that also ties into making the engagement level go up with that content. If it's done in a way where you even mentioned they're going to take bits and pieces and focus on the salient points that matter to them. So if you can provide the importance in a context that they think is important, you're probably going to get more of the salient points to connect that you want them to connect.
Even if you're explaining, here's why I want you to think about it in this way. Tell me how you're thinking about it. Here's why I want you to think about it in this way. I want to be clear. They are not you does not mean that they have less moral value. But power screws up relationships in the first place because power creates fear in the natural course if we don't work against that. And then what you were talking about is what I call mind reading. And we all expect a certain amount of mind reading. And the longer we've worked together, the more we expect it, and the closer we are. I mean, here we are, for the audience's sake, here we are. You could say parent and child, as well as colleagues. We don't always know what the other one is thinking. Sometimes we're really right and can be really helpful to each other, but not always. And so there is still a reservoir of goodwill that's needed and the clarity that you're talking about, and also a kind of gratitude that we are figuring this out together. And I appreciate your sticking with me while we're working through it, because humans don't do this just, it comes naturally to everybody. That's not how it is. And when relationships are complicated by money, that is a distancing factor. And when relationships are complicated by security needs, another distancing factor. So there's all this noise confusing the signal. But the real thing is, as you said, nobody's had your experiences. Nobody thinks the way you think. Even if you start to think they do, because people who work for another person who determines their pay and their promotions, and sometimes whether they have a good day, those people want you to feel that it's all okay with them. Unless they're taking you on, of course. But in general, they want you to feel that it's okay with them, even if their understanding is completely inaccurate.
In fact, you made me think of many situations where the response from a colleague or someone, let's say, lower down on the hierarchy has been, well, I'm going to do it this way because that's what X person wants, X person being in power. And they don't actually understand the thing, just that in a previous example, it has been demonstrated that person X cares about this thing.
Right.
And that takes precedence over the actual project, the actual goal, the work itself.
Right.
So yeah, it absolutely comes out in the day-to-day.
Right. This is why historical data is not on its own enough. Because I had that one experience where boss person said, do it this way. And that's what I do forever after. And I know I'm right because I did not die that day. I was not fired. It was considered good or good enough. So don't mess with my head telling me there's another way.
I'm going to connect another example. This is an interesting situation that I have personally come across with at least 2 bosses in my time. Not the one I'm talking to right now.
Okay.
And I'm making mention of this specifically because Liz is characteristically different in this way. I am naturally going to ask clarifying questions all the bloody time, even on things that I already have experience and historical, situational knowledge of how things should go. Many people in power have said to me at different times, "You already know this. Why are you asking?" And they mean it. I know that they mean it in a positive way. You're smart. You get this. You don't need to be afraid, because they think that by asking, it's a fear situation of, I don't know what I'm doing. And they look at it as, no, you do. You've done the right thing before. I'm not worried about this. But the way it actually comes off, at least in those situations, was, don't bother me. Don't ask me these questions that you already know the answers to, where I know that not every situation is the same. Because some of those same bosses will say you have to think situationally. You can't just be black and white about it. So I want to go in and say, great, I think I understand all of this. Is this what you're saying, or is it something else? And being able as a leader to say internally, okay, I'm glad they're asking to make sure that we're on the same page, rather than, oh God, now I have to answer more questions from this person. That's a huge thing. So I want that example being out there, and to say specifically that I think, Liz, you're very good at this, at taking my questions and actually treating them with the acceptance that this is about this situation, not all situations. But it is a pitfall that I see a lot of leaders falling into. And even to tie it into our original thought about seeing further down the pathway, if you're shutting down your employee because they're asking questions, you're training them not to ask questions. 100%. And then later, when they don't understand something and don't ask a question, you're going to have a problem.
Yeah. So that's very interesting, Dave, because what I get questions about from clients more is, why haven't they learned this yet? Okay. Not why aren't they checking? Sometimes I get that, but more it's, why haven't they learned this yet? Mm-hmm. And often it's because they were never actually given the full context. Part of the context is competitor X is different from competitor Y. And let me tell you how. So, look, this is why it's called knowledge work. It's not plug and play. First of all, it's just harder. This is why so many projects take longer than planned, because of the need for these reiterations, for the leader to actually recognize that there's another piece of information they have to give, which they don't blame themselves for generally. It's not, I left this out. It's, here's some new information you should incorporate. But it's a very tricky thing. I mean, when you ask questions that are similar to questions you've asked before, they're not stupid questions. They're thoughtful questions. You could stay. Sometimes there are circumstances where particularly people in frontline roles or first line supervision do ask what seem like stupid questions. That's a pattern recognition thing from my perspective. If somebody is actually asking the same question 3 times after they should have learned something, the appropriate response is, why don't you know that already? The appropriate response is thinking, why wouldn't they know that yet? What blocked it? What wasn't clear? What's their misapprehension? Part of why, thank you for what I'm taking as a compliment, that I see more. I'm just crazy about questions. Because if you can ask more of them and think about them, you come up with plausible explanations that then help you address the problem. When you ask so many questions the way I do about how and why things work, you know there's almost always more than one explanation. And therefore, you can go back to people not in a critical, what's wrong with you kind of way, but in an open, helpful, tell me about what's not working. Because I really thought I had explained this. You've had the same question all 3 times in what seem to be very similar circumstances. So are you afraid I won't like the answer? Did someone else tell you it was a problem? Tell me, subtext.
Mm-hmm.
I can take the answer. I can accept what you tell me and actually work with it, and I will not bite your head off or treat you like you're an idiot. That subtext has to be there. If they think you're going to bite their head off or treat them like an idiot, they will not tell you the truth. But if they'll tell you the truth, you have a chance of figuring out what went wrong. Maybe they're just inattentive, and then you get to say to them, look, I'm happy to help you develop a cheat sheet you can use. I'm happy to pair you with a more experienced person if you need to observe more. Let's figure out how you learn best. But at some point, you're going to need to stand alone in this. You don't have to tolerate poor performance, but you have to know where it's coming from to know if it is fully their performance or if their performance is the result of structural conditions that they can't control.
I really, 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 really want to ask about things like how you put someone in a safe space so that they can tell you about these things, but that's not for today. So many other topics related, of course. But bringing us back home to this idea of what I'll call forward and distance thinking. I'm going to term that distance thinking. Being able to see further down the path to know what to expect and prepare for, and ultimately bring whatever the thing is through to success. We've talked about the self-mastery aspects, about recognizing when you are, when you're not. We've talked about how to expand your vision, and then how the example of yourself doing so is one of the ways of leading others to that methodology too. We've also talked about how people are different and how there's no parallel, or there might be no parallel between what you're thinking and what someone else is thinking, even given the same information. So being able to bridge that gap and as a leader explain things clearly enough for that person, again, recognizing the individuality. What about on a process level? All of this has been human focused. I want to go to the operations side. You mentioned at the beginning, your background was in operations, and my background is in operations. That's what I do most of the time. Now that we've spoken about the human aspect, What about the structural aspect? What about the systems in place that allow people to think further ahead or not? What about the way that we work, not as people, but as organizations, and how that applies to being able to see further down?
You want to pick something in there?
I like big questions.
Okay. So let's take tools, for example. I mean, now you can ask whatever brand of AI, in circumstances like these, what have you seen as the gold standard solution? You can actually get case history. They won't be the same, but there will be similarities. And one of the things I didn't say before that I want to say is learn more stuff. Learn how other people think, whether it is a podcast like this or reading. There's a tremendous amount of content out there about problem solving, about decision making. These do not sound like fun topics, but if you hear people discussing them, they're kind of interesting. And learning about how other people do it, great. Maybe somebody, reads fortune cookies, and learning how other people do it help you think, oh, I want to try that. And, oh, I would never do that. That's great. Experimentation is one of the best tools we have. So run a test of some kind. Do a small venture. Venture out. Write a test message and share it with people who are either excellent critical readers or somehow similar to your audience. That's just one example. If you are talking about, does the software, the legacy software in the organization, support the work that people actually have to do every day? That's the kind of thing, it's one of those horrible things where it usually requires a large investment at some point. And often the management is loath to spend that money. So then you have to do cost benefit analysis and show the kinds of things that have kept going wrong for the last year and a half, and that we expect to accelerate as we try to do whatever new work we're trying to do, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to capture both clear, concrete costs, financial costs, and you also have to translate human cost into plugs of financial cost so that people will understand what the likelihood of failure means. That's just one example of how you deal with the actual process challenges. Collecting data to make a case, teaching people, individual people, how to present a case for their opinion is a really valuable thing, and many people don't learn it at home and don't learn it in school.
So I am going to do a little plug here, because when you talked about the legacy system aspect of things, all I could think of was Whitney saying it's a structural problem. And for those that don't know, this is in reference to Liz's animated miniseries, Better at Work with Liz Kislik. And I'll put the link in the description so people can access that. But yes, the legacy aspect, the systematic aspect, is a huge cost and a huge burden. And I think most owner, leader, decision maker groups are, like you said, loath to take on that cost and the change involved. Does it succeed after you bring it in? And that's why I wanted to ask about these operational aspects of seeing further down, because the person that can't might be more ready to say no to a change in system because this is working fine enough, even if there's pain. We could go on with this for a long time, but we've already done so. So I'm going to cap us here and say there is so much more behind the idea of seeing the bigger picture, seeing further down the path, the distance view. There's plenty to be gained. So in case anyone wants to reach out to you, Liz, obviously they have all of my information with the podcast, but if they want to reach out to you directly about these topics or others, how can our viewers and listeners find you?
You can find me at lizkislik.com, which is the company website. You can find me on LinkedIn, of course. You can send Dave a note and he'll find me. And I just want to say, so he plugged the miniseries, and one of the reasons to watch is because it's fun. There's actually a theme song. Dave is playing guitar and singing. You got to hear it. It's really fun. And I just want to make a pitch for there are aspects of work that can be really fun, even when the thing you're dealing with is an ugly thing. Just to say, oh, this is ugly, why would anybody ever want to address it? Then it becomes the elephant in the room and you can spend years avoiding it. But there are ways, so long as you're alive, collecting a paycheck, there are ways to deal with almost anything. Maybe not easily, maybe only little bit by little bit, but it is almost always possible to make progress.
I can't think of a better place to leave it than right there. Normally we would do our Fix It 15 at the end of this segment, but we're going to skip over that because obviously as we work together, it's our company. We don't need to talk about the problems that you're having and need help with because I'm working on them already. So we will call it there. And thank you, Liz, for spending the time to hang out, to talk about this stuff, and to share your expertise and insight. Again, all of the information about how to reach the both of us, Liz Kislik Associates, will be in the description. And anything else you want to say to the audience, Liz?
Yes. I want to say that part of why I and we have learned how to work on these things, we deal with them ourselves. It is not that we are problem-free. It's about being willing to face whatever is there. And I've enjoyed this conversation. It's put me in a much better mood than I was before. And this is worthy work. So I really encourage people to do it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Liz. And I'll see you in the office. Take care.
A pleasure.
This is clearly a topic that is in no way done being covered. We reviewed some big aspects of self-mastery and introspection of our reactions, thought processes, and assumptions that even remind me of my conversation in a previous episode with Jess Jacobs about lizard brain reactivity during change. We covered some really important structures that you can implement right away to help scaffold your behaviors and the processes you need to work through. Perhaps even more impactful was how we can better lead with context and clarity and view situations with a forward-thinking mentality, like reviewing aging systems and processes, or creating better strategies and being able to manage people through all of it. I hope this gives you some ideas of how to see further down the road towards better outcomes for yourself and your business. If any of it does help, please let us know by leaving a comment or reaching out directly. We'd love to share in your wins. And if you'd like to learn more about how we might help you and your team grow sustainably, all our links are in the description. Hope to hear from you soon, and bye for now.